Hello and welcome back to the first GEELLE International Seminar. This is our final session of day two, and we are glad to have you all here with us. My name is João Paulo Araújo, and I'm a PhD student at USP and a professor at the Rural Federal University of Pernambuco. Please, if you're not following our channel, please click to subscribe it. And to stay up to date with our videos, click on the bell to activate notifications. So now let me invite our moderators. The first one is Luciana Parnaíba de Castro, who is an English teacher educator at Federal University of Campina Grande, Paraíba. She has a master's degree in language and teaching from UFCG, and she is in her third year of her PhD at the University of São Paulo, and was a visiting scholar at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Luciana is interested in studies on language education, language teacher education, and literacies, multi-critical digital. She's part of the study group on language education in foreign language, GEELLE, USP, and loves participating in events and talking about these topics. She has a 5-year-old son named Daniel, a border collie named Spock. She loves to be with her family, going out with friends, reading books, having coffee, and watching movies. Welcome, Luciana.
Thank you, João. It's a pleasure to be here with you all.
Now I'd like to invite to screen Simone Yuki Kawashima. Simone holds a bachelor degrees in English Portuguese languages and literature from the University of São Paulo, and a master's degree in literature from USP. She is a PhD candidate in the same program, focusing on literacy studies, teacher training, and memes. She believes that memes can be a powerful way to engage people. A curious Gemini, slightly shy, and disciplined, who has learned to love sports. She has a sweet tooth, likes to bake cakes for her friends, and is part of the group of people who don't need coriander. Welcome, Simone.
Thank you very much, João. It's a pleasure to be here as well. I'm sure it's going to be an amazing talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I'd like to invite Michelle Avelar, who is a PhD student at USP, professor at IFG, Instituto Federal de Goiás, and Michelle is Goiana, Luis' wife, Luis Felipe's mother, Josie and Maninho's daughter. She enjoys watching series, spending time with family and friends, writing, traveling, reading, gastronomic tourism, among other things. Gamer and researcher, she believes that education, especially language education, can be fun and interesting. Michele also is interested in studies on language and education, literacies, digital games, and teacher education. So welcome, Michele.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you all.
So now I'll be in the backstage, and so the floor is yours.
Thank you, João Paulo. And now I will call to join us Dr. Mary Kalantzis and Dr. Bill Cope. They are professors at the Department of Education, Policy, Organization and Leadership at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. They authored and edited several influential books on education, including New Learning, Elements of a Science of Education, Literacies, A Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, and the 2-volume Grammar of Multimodal Meaning, among others, a lot of others important books. These works have been translated into multiple languages and are widely recognized in the field of education. So welcome, Bill Cope and Mary Kalantzis.
Thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be back with so many of our Brazilian colleagues and friends. But I think as we talk today, all of us will be conscious, we've been together now for many decades, how different this moment is, and the challenges that we're now facing are so different from when we started talking about the National Literacy Project with Valkyria and with the rest of you. So thank you for inviting us to be with you in this closing session.
Hi there, Valkyria. We saw the message. Yeah, great to see you all.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a pleasure to welcome to you today's section on the topic language education in times of artificial intelligence. So Professor Bill and Professor Mary, thank you both for joining us. We look forward to hearing your perspectives. So please, the floor is yours.
And Helena, a lot of familiar faces coming through there. Yeah, lovely. Great to see everybody. All right.
Let's start.
We'll start with the presentation.
Michelle will be
pushing
the PowerPoint.
I will put the presentation. Just a moment.
Pushing forward the slides, yeah. Now, I might say, just as we get started, Mary and I have finished today a second long paper. We did a long paper trying to figure out what this AI stuff means for literacy. And today we did another one about what it means for learning additional languages, right? So we'll
share it with you.
We'll share this with you, and we'll share the papers with you. We post them online all the time, so we'll do that. So this one's a combination of two papers, and there's quite a lot of stuff here, and it's not, a lot of it's not hugely easy, we've got to say. These are difficult questions. So we're going to, and by the way, this is a thing where we asked DALL-E, which is the OpenAI image generator, to create this image. So we're the proud
and the prompt,
we're the proud artists. The prompt was, see up there Unicode. Unicode's this fundamental scripting system which is used in all digital media now. There is only one scripting system, one universal scripting system, and we asked to create a Byzantine icon where the message is coming out in Unicode. So there you go. That's what it is. And you can see there, it looks like the baby is, we don't know,
on their iPhone.
doesn't have any particular gender, which is also part of our times. And it's there. Well, it's not looking at the iPhone, so good on the baby.
It's holding on to the
Yeah. Anyhow, that was, let's move on to the slides.
Yes.
Michelle, next slide.
Right.
Right, so these are the three parts of our talk. We're going to talk about what does this AI stuff mean for schooling. Then a difficult part, I'm afraid, which is how does it work? What does it do? And the reason why we're asking that for you folks as language teachers is that it is unusually a language technology. If it has power, it's only the power of language. So what we want to try and do is explain how it works as language technology, which might be a little bit difficult, a bit technical, not computer science technical, but kind of theoretical linguistics technical. And then the last part, we're going to talk about some experiments where we've been building these generative AI apps and how we put them to work.
So you asked about our research, and part 3 will showing you what research we're doing at the moment in relation to what we understand about point 1 and 2. So can we go to the next slide, Michelle?
All right. So firstly, using technology mediation in education is not new. This is B.F. Skinner's teaching machine from the early 1950s. And one of the great dangers in this is the idea that we can mechanize education. So we know, and now with AI, there's emerged a new set of dreams about the possibility of mechanizing education because it's so effective as a communicative partner. So next slide. And in fact, applying this work to education, it's been a long process. And here we have the first computer-mediated learning system, which was a system called Plato. Plato is not the philosopher, it stands for some acronym or other, which was created at the University of Illinois. And in fact, interesting, Mary and I wrote a history of this development. 1959 it began. And it's interesting that many of the things we're facing now were actually faced very early on. I won't go into any detail about that. There's a long paper there about that. So next slide. Now, what we have with generative AI, we're going to try and unpack this a little bit. Here's a definition of what it is. So it's these uniquely reconstituted digital artifacts, text, image, sound, and other things in multimodal combinations. What happens is created on the basis of patterns in human meanings that have been identified through sources through unsupervised machine learning and reinforcement learning through human feedback. We're going to explain a little bit about how that works later on, but it is only working with language. What's interesting is it's not like conventional computer coding. It's working on the connections between words and language. So one side of it is a thing called a large language model, and we're going to explain a little bit about what that is in a moment. The other side of it, and they're actually two different technologies in a way, is chatbots, which interact with that large language model.
Next slide.
Next slide there, Michelle. Yeah. Right. So neither of these are new technologies. Here's the first chat technology, which was 1966 by, and in a way, what it was a programmed dialogue with open-ended questions based on Rogerian psychology. There's a psychology behind chatbots now too, by the way. So right from the very start, these things became obvious. Next slide. And this here is the other side of the technology, the statistical language processing. And this image here, this person is a kind of very important person who you probably never heard of. He developed the processes whereby the machine doesn't understand language in its form or its structure. It only does statistical processing of words and corpora. His name's Robert Mercer, and he was the one who won Donald Trump his first election by working with Cambridge Analytica, combing through Facebook pages and building data profiles based on these statistical language technologies. There's a politics to all this stuff, is what I'm trying to say. Next slide. So now we have OpenAI. We're still on GPT-4. And it produces a real problem for education. And the most obvious problem is any student can get, if you've got an assignment which is worth, like a writing assignment, for example, not just in language, but in any subject area, anything which involves, putting in an essay or doing an essay, there's no way of knowing. Plagiarism detectors don't work. There's no way of knowing whether that work has been done by the student or by a machine. But the good news is there's a solution, which is on the next slide. Are you ready for the solution? Here it comes. That's the solution. So, if we lock our students up and deny them internet connections and ask that they regurgitate stuff from memory, but in a way, this is a really bad move, not just in terms of, what it does, it effectively defines learning just as long-term memory, right? And it's individual long-term memory. And in fact, for any mental work we do now, we do rely on looking things up. We do rely on, which is another way of saying we rely on social connections all the time, as opposed to this very individualistic, memory-centered view of education.
And today in Australia, the Prime Minister has said that digital devices were going to be banned in schools.
No, social media.
Up until the age of 16.
Yeah, social media. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So let me just give you an example of this. This is, and I want to point out some problems with it. I can ask it to do an essay, and if I ask it to do a straightforward essay like describe the features of good leadership or something, it's going to do an essay which is pretty good and which the student can hand in and get an A for. This is one where I asked it to talk about something which I know too much about, which is tell me the history of the Peloponnesian Railway, which is a little railway that goes around the place where Mary was born in Greece. So, and here are some pictures that I took of that. The ChatGPT responses there on the right. Next slide. Now, what happens is I'm going to highlight just there some issues. Firstly, it reads very like a cliched essay. Word perfect, by the way, not a single typo, generated in 25 seconds. You know how fast these things get done. But also it's full of factual errors. So the first thing I've circled there is a cliche. The second thing is decommissioned in the 1970s. No, it was closed in 2011. And also the references there, they look pretty impressive, aren't they? They're good citations with URLs and everything, and they're all fake. It makes things up. And in the world of generative AI, this is called hallucination, which is another way of a polite way of saying
Next slide.
It's fake. Next slide. So these are enough things that are intrinsically wrong with this stuff. It buries its sources. It's not good with facts. It doesn't have a conception of a domain. Ethically, it's well mannered, but it's not big. You've got to change the underlying model because the underlying model is full of bad stuff which gets modified, and it looks like it's friendly to you all the time. So for education, you want people who are willing to be critical friends, and it's not critical. I mean, that's one of the logics of a chatbot. Next slide. So in other words, there's things about it which are kind of wrong. But let me just say, this is, Mary and I have also been thinking the last few days. So that's in terms of writing, but let's talk about what we're trying to achieve in language learning. So this person here has got an earphone. And by the way, all the components of this are there already. And talking to a Chinese speaker, right? Knows no Chinese. There's no reason why there can't be immediate translation in her own voice. So I don't know whether you've seen the very latest versions of these voice cloning software. You speak into the machine for a little while, and then you give it a bit of text, and it'll speak. It's you speaking, right? So she might instantly become a very competent Chinese speaker because she's hearing stuff translated simultaneously by the LLM, and everything she says is being translated simultaneously into the language of the person that she's speaking to. This is very, very close to being there. All the components of it are there already, to be quite frank. So one of the questions might be, if for functional purposes, we don't really need other languages now for reading because the machine translation is so good. For functional purposes, we won't need it much for communication either. So then what's the point? What's the question people are going to ask is, what do we do with what we're calling another language learning, whether it's an imperial language or a minority language or a heritage language or an indigenous language? What's it going to mean? Next slide. So the first point we've kind of already made, which is reduces the functional motivations to learn another language. One of the ironies is going to be, though, that it'll be less necessary to use imperial languages. Let me give you a concrete example. In our paper, we've found some concrete examples. People have built a Vietnamese language LLM, which is tuned for medical. Generative AI is very good at translation. It's a generation ahead of previous AI for translation. So they built a Vietnamese medical LLM, an LLM which is tuned for medical context. And the answer is it won't be necessary for people who want to be medical researchers in Vietnam to learn English. That's pretty revolutionary, to be quite frank. They'll be able to read the whole medical literature. They'll be able to write in Vietnamese and produce, some of the words, imperial languages like English, which have seemed essential, in this kind of environment are going to become less essential. The other thing which is incredibly interesting about this space, and again in our paper we cite a whole lot of very interesting examples of this, is that they're very, very good at extending what's called low resource languages. So a couple of examples. There's a language, I've forgotten its name now, which is a variant of a Romance language with 1,000 speakers in Italy. And with just 5 hours of transcripts, it does pretty good translations and pretty good transcriptions. For indigenous languages as well, there's incredible possibilities of building teaching environments, learning environments, language speaking environments, language use environments, which revive small languages. And in the LLM world, there's a big literature on what's called low resource languages. Have a look at it. The best place to have a look at it, by the way, is to go to Archive, where this stuff is just developing by the day. That's ARXIV, which is
Unpublished work, but
which is preprints.
preprints.
Yeah. But some of the most important papers in this whole field are now only published on archive, to be quite frank. But search for low resource languages, and there's fascinating stuff happening. So the answer is, it's very, very contradictory what's happening, but the implications for language and literacy teaching and learning are enormous.
Next slide.
Okay, that's part one. Do we want to? Do you want to add something before?
No, I'll just no. We don't. We've got to go. It's going too slowly.
Right. Okay. Okay. Now the hard stuff. How does it work? Well, we've had these kind of revolutionary technologies in the history of media and the history of literacy and language. One was the printing press, Gutenberg in 1450, but in fact the Chinese had almost the same invention, but it didn't get widely used in the 11th century. Next slide. Now
so this is mechanical reproduction.
It's mechanical reproduction. Now what's really interesting with this, it's the mechanical production of text. In other words, meaningful text can be produced by a machine. This is a very, very, very big, this is a big thing, to be quite frank, which must have huge implications, not just for language and literacy learning, but for all of education, to the extent that it's centered around texts of one kind or another, all of human knowledge, to be quite frank. So this is the first machine to do that. But one of the important things is language is infinitely complex. One of the points that Chomsky made was, what we do is we recombine the world all the time in ways which are unique. And this is, the infinite complexity of language the human mind can deal with and reprocess stuff. Like the last 100 words I said have never been said in quite that form, in quite that combination ever before, but I've managed to say them and you've managed to understand them. But the machine can now do that as well. And that's a really big thing. But the way in which it does it is fundamentally different.
But there are no guardrails on production. Anyone can do this now. And as we saw recently in our elections here, people can produce any kind of information and circulate it powerfully anywhere. And if you're rich and famous, you can do that more. But even if you're poor, you're doing it on TikTok. So, before there was some control with the reproduction of knowledge in the printing press, but now it's just production and anyone can do it with the devices that we have.
Next slide. Okay, that's the point we just made. They both make coherent meaning about from the endless combinatorial possibilities of language, but they have different mechanisms. Next slide. So firstly, how does it work? Well, firstly, it's only a text technology. I'll tell you how it does images in a second, but image is a derivative of text. So text is that which can be expressed in Unicode. Unicode is this universal scripting system, 150,000 odd characters from every language and every symbolic system. It includes emojis and all sorts of symbols. And so on. Is that my phone? No, it's someone else outside. So in other words, this is kind of the raw material. Beyond that, it doesn't work with characters. What it does, it works with things called tokens, and tokens are morphemes, if you like. But one of the paradoxes, people say it's artificial intelligence, but in fact, the breaks between words have all been created by humans who put spaces there, in the case of words. And there's another process called stemming, where words that are composite words are broken up in all sorts of ways. But essentially, roughly, a token is a word. So in other words, that's the unit of operation. It's multimodal only secondarily, mediated by text. So the way in which image generation works, huge databases where things have been labeled. This is the Eiffel Tower.
Like tokens.
So, and then when you say, I want a picture, and here's a picture of a dolphin, which is also labeled. And when you say to the generative AI, I want a picture of a dolphin jumping over the Eiffel Tower, it goes and finds a dolphin picture and an Eiffel Tower picture and puts them together. So in other words, but it only works with textual prompts, and only works because the images have been textually labeled. So it's primarily a textual technology. Next slide. Okay, here's some examples of how it works. And it doesn't understand semantics, doesn't understand grammar, doesn't understand anything, right? But what it does, I'm going to take 3 sentences. And by the way, these images are all generated by Leonardo, which is one of the image generators, but that's not the main point we've got here. So walk has been stemmed. So there are actually 5 tokens there. Stemmed because the ED is represents past tense on many English verbs, right? So in fact, we break it into 2 because there are 2 meanings that have been put together, walk and in the past. Next slide. And then I walk the dog, looks like the same word, doesn't it? And again.
Next slide.
I walk the prisoners to their cells. Now, in fact, these are 3 very different types of walk, which the AI is able to pick up. When I walk to work, I'm direction oriented. When I walk the dog, I'm going around in a circle and coming back again, and maybe the dog's walking me. When I walk the prisoners, there's not much agency involved on their part. You know, they're being walked by me, right? So in fact, we have 3 very different types of walks. Next slide. And these types of grammatical distinctions would have been picked up with all sorts of, we understand these subtleties ourselves. Now, how does the AI understand the subtleties? By the statistical relationship of words to words around them, right? That's essentially what it is. And the way it operates is what's called a next token predictor, right? So what happens is, and by the way, here's a quote from Michael Halliday that, you know, grammars are resources for meaning. So what I do is walk for me is a verb because it's an action. I am a pronoun representing a person. You know we can do sort of gross parsing of these sentences, which we do in language teaching. But in fact, it does the very, very subtle parsing. Next slide. Which might be, there's the Chomsky quote about this. We'll quickly jump through the next slide. So what happens is that there are then profound differences between the way the 2 process the infinities of language, which are pretty important. You know, a statistical approach as opposed to what we call a grammatical approach. A grammatical approach is you think in terms of these generalizations and you put words in place. It's what Chomsky said, essentially. Chomsky was wrong about a lot of things, but that he was right about. Next slide. And we can leave these slides with you. And by the way, there's long versions of this in paper. So what we think is that, you know, we've been working on this question of a multimodal grammar that applies not just to text, but to image as well. And we think that, you know, it's time to rethink the way language works in ways which are intelligible and usable in educational contexts. And this is what we've been working on.
And with a critical orientation as well.
Yeah. This is a difficult slide, which I won't really go into in a great deal. This is the multimodal grammar that we've come up with. What we're saying is that really generative AI works in a rather restricted range there on the left. But in fact, there are all these transpositions into these other forms in which image generation is a very, very good example. It's interestingly not very good at oral speech because a lot of what happens in oral speech, it gets lost. But increasingly, it's getting better at all that stuff in all sorts of ways. Next slide. Okay, now on to the last point, and I'm going to hand over to Marion.
Okay. Racing through this. Okay, so as educators, what do? Do we kind of throw our arms up and say, you know, it's all too hard or all too complicated? Our students, at least our students, are already using these resources to produce things. So what we've done, and as you know, those of you who know our work, we've been working with building technology. It's time for us as educators to build the tools we need in order to harness the digital. So we built a long time ago a platform anticipating the digital, which was about, you know, engagement, collaboration, particularly multimodality. We knew that all meaning was going to be made in multimodal ways, even though we've now got a different language turn. The tokens allow for that. but also to be building analytics so that we're assessing students as they go rather than the end, and creating interactivity and global relationships. But now what we've done to this Scholar platform is we've added generative AI as part of the learning. The core of this pedagogy that we have in the CG Scholar is based on peer feedback. If collaboration matters, then peer feedback is one of the ways in which we do that. And we'll show you the way in which we've integrated the AI in ways that is ethical and effective. And so could go to the next slide, please. So the workflow process we have in the Scholar platform is that a student will be given a task to produce some kind of artifact, and they'll draft it. We then put that draft in an AI review, and I'll speak a little bit more about that because it's not AI in the wild, right? It's a very particular kind of AI corpus that we've created. They then revise and resubmit, and then they send it out to peer review, and they get peer feedback, and then we ask them to reflect on what kind of feedback did they get from the AI, what kind of feedback did they get from the peer reviews, so that they become discerning about what the differences are. They make a change, and then they revise and submit. So we've tried it different ways. We tried it with the peer review first, and then the peer review, the AI second, and I'll tell you what kind of data we got from that. But we've developed this process in order to test the way we can use AI effectively. The next slide, please. Right. Those of you who know our work also know that we collect in this new environment, the ecosystem of learning with the digital and with AI. We've created an assess-as-you-go tool that we call Astaplot, and this tells you what our pedagogy is about, really, because we've divided the data that we're collecting in three parts. One part is knowledge. All evaluation involves knowledge. But in the online environment, you have to also measure and grade effort and focus in that online environment. And thirdly, for us, is something we called help, the possibility of collaboration, the possibility of community. There's no point having that as a value. In our context, we also grade it as we collect data about the nature of the participation in the online space, because it is possible to collect incidental data, both about knowledge, about the way in which you engage, and of course, of how we collaborate and help each other. Next slide, please. So the important part, I don't know, we're not going to show this.
No, actually, I was thinking I'd show it to you, but I'm going to mention, or do you want to mention the main components of this?
No, you go ahead.
So we actually launched last week a new version of our platform called Cyber Scholar, or a new component in the platform, I might say, called Cyber Scholar, which has several components. One is the project, which is what are the students doing. One is a rubric, which is how they're to be evaluated. The third thing is a knowledge base, where you kind of upload material, which is the stuff you want taught, if you like, which might be, we're doing a trial in a high school on Monday, for example, where the students are talking about democracy, what democracy is, and we uploaded a couple of thousand pages of different books, which is kind of the knowledge base. So it'll give them informed feedback about the themes that the teacher thought were important. And then this thing called the cyber-social learning log. When they're using AI, we want to know how much of the work is theirs and how much is the AI. We want them in a productive relationship with the AI, but we want to keep a log to know that they're not just relying on the AI, that they're interacting with it productively.
Right. So what is the teacher's role?
Next slide, by the way.
I'm going to stick to this for a minute. The teacher's role, no, go back to that other one. Sorry, just go back. The teacher's role, in collaboration with other teachers, is not only to determine the project, but to develop the rubric by which you're going to evaluate it in this space, and then to produce an AI corpus. And it's possible to do that around any particular subject, any particular area. You put all the information that you want in it, you put all the exercises that you want, and you shape the AI for the purposes of this particular subject or this particular course. And it's really important that we call it a vector database. It's possible to do it. We don't send them out into the wild where you can hallucinate or give them bad information. We put the sources all in there, and we shape it so that when the students go into that space, they have the rubric which evaluates them, they have the knowledge which the teacher has put in, they have the evaluation process clearly that they can relate to. And we call it a cyber-social relationship. It's a relationship between what a teacher does and what the machine can do, designed in a series of steps in order to produce learning outcomes. The next slide, please.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned this.
Oh,
We'll skip over that. Yeah.
Right. Go to the next
slide. So this is kind of the, all right, you want to start talking about the results.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. During this research, when we first started it, the students really preferred the peer feedback, right? They didn't like the machine initially because it was unmediated in the way that we said, and they were unhappy with the way it came into them. So that's why in the second instance, and if we go to the next slide, in the next iteration of this research, next slide. Oh no, this is telling you what the differences were. As I said, they preferred the peer. They liked the diversity. And what the peers said, they didn't like the subjective way sometimes in which the personal occurred, and they sometimes it lacked balance for them. Whereas in the AI review, they said that they liked it, that they got immediate feedback. And it was constructive and a specific. There were initially some issues about errors and non-specific responses, but those are the things we cleaned up once we put in the vector database, where we didn't send them out into the AI in the wild. So after that, if we go to the next slide, once we had modified the tools that we're using, you can see immediately that the students now were finding that the AI was giving them much better results quickly, and
well, not much better, somewhat better,
satisfactory,
but also very different.
Yes.
Right? It was very different type of feedback. So the answer is you need this mix of human and machine. If this stuff's to work, it's the mix that's the critical thing.
So for us, the point that we're trying to make here is the role of the teacher is now different in this space. We can't stand back with the textbook and turn the page. We have to take these tools, reshape them for our purposes, and keep testing to see how well they work or don't work. Next slide, please.
Okay, so look, I think we might make this the second last slide, actually. I think we're very near the end.
Yes.
These are some conclusions. So the idea of artificial intelligence, which is the machine does this thinking work for humans. We don't really like that idea. By the way, this is the man who invented the phrase, John McCarthy, and that was his definition of what artificial intelligence is. In fact, look, it's next slide there. What we really want to do is we want to build around the word cyber, not artificial. Cyber talks about feedback relationships. So cyber, the kybernetes in Greek is the oarsman at the back of the boat there, who steers it backwards and forwards and keeps adjusting things. So it's a human-machine relationship. Move on to the next slide. And I think this might be right near the end. So what we like is we want this idea of cyber social learning, but even the cyber is really social. What happens is the teachers put all the content into the knowledge base. The teachers build a rubric. And when the AI then talks to the students, it's talking with and through the teacher. And also given the fact it's language-based, on the basis of the whole of human experience, which is recorded in these large language models. So to think that it's a machine it's the human intellect that's been recorded in there, the same way it is in a library, the same way in which a library is useful, and it's a relationship. It's not the machine replicating or what humans could do.
In fact, we need to stress that the word artificial is not helpful for us, because
Terrible
it's
idea.
humans all the way along the line. First, humans scraped all the knowledge from everything in the world in every language. Then those same humans fine-tuned it in order to do certain things. And now those same humans kind of do other things with that data and get different apps and different apps, and they make a business out of it. And we have to engage with it in ways that work for us. And we have to keep experimenting to see what we can do that is effective and ethical at the same time.
I think that might be the last slide, if I'm not wrong.
Is the last one? One more? Finish? One more?
Go on to the next slide.
No, that's it.
Yeah, look, this one is just saying, look, the idea that it's like a brain. A computer's not like a brain in any sense.
Yes.
So, and the next slide.
I think that's it.
Oh, yes, some literacy. Don't worry about that. There's some conclusions. And then one more slide, and there's a QR code where you can get some of the stuff we've written. Now keep going.
That's it.
We've already spoken to all of this.
But if you go back to the one...
Click straight through. That's the last slide, and there's a QR code there.
Yes. So you have access to these, so you can read them, and you can go back to the list of recommendations we make about what we need to do as educators. You just go back.
Also look, the QR code there
code,
is that the literacy paper is there at that QR code, and this one we've done about learning other languages. We'll probably post the next few days. We've just finished it.
Michelle, could you go back 2 slides? Just 2 slides.
Should leave the QR
Here,
code sitting there.
right. So we have to broaden the definition of what written text is. We have to recognize, and I think all of you do, the multimodality nature of literacy nowadays. And also that literacy is dialogical, interactive, interpretive, that we come from different backgrounds, and agency is an important part of participating and performing. And that we have to rethink grammar. I mean, we've tried to indicate some of the ways in which grammar needs to be reconsidered. The traditional grammar, which just label parts of speech and their behaviours, is not enough for us now. We need to extend that. And we need really different types of assessments, different ways of capturing as you go performance in assessments.
Not like those kids in the classroom who had their blinkers on.
And
it has to be assessment where you're interacting with technologies, and the technologies are helping you. Right?
And as you have done in this conference, we say seize the day. Take control of the AA. Don't just let it be out there in the commercial world. We have to develop educational programs that continue to be about justice and access and participation and co-production and collaborative learning.
So let me end on a justice point as well. How can we use these as, there are gross inequalities in the world. How can we use these tools to improve access and reduce those gross inequalities? So for us, this is not just a mechanical thing, and it's not about achieving old-fashioned educational outcomes. It's about how do you actually use these tools in a way, look, to make these big changes that we want to make in the world. So that's basically our argument. So let's get into the questions now. Let's get into the important thing.
Thank you, Professors Bill Cope and Mary Kalantzis. Thank you for sharing so much with us. I have a question. You talked about CG Scholar and how you implemented and shaped ChatGPT to suit your specific needs in your courses, and how you have been analyzing that. And you shared some of the students' responses to this system of peer review and then AI review, how they feel about that. And I'm curious to know how, regarding your relationship with your students, and when you read their papers also, have you noticed any change regarding the use of AI in their styles of writing, in their creativity, because these are the things that we worry about in education, some of the things that we worry about, like you mentioned. So I would like to know if you have noticed any change
Right.
like
There's three responses. The first thing is about Scholar. We started Scholar many years ago because we thought that the LMSs, the learning management systems, were not useful for the values that we had. They were upload, download, a quiz at the end, maybe a chat. But we've all invested in them now and we're stuck with them, but they're not useful for what we want to do. So we created Scholar to show others, who were creating, that it's possible to create a platform that's more human, that's more engaging, more collaborative. Now with AI, we've had to recalibrate again. And the first thing that we're noticing with our students is, particularly students for whom English is not a first language, they're sending us texts which are word perfect. Word perfect. And what we do now is we have a policy. We say, okay, you can use the AI, but you have to declare how and when and why. And in the Scholar platform, we've now added a new piece of technology which will tell us, the professors, even if the students doesn't, how much they've used and where. So we've had to.
Yeah. So in other words, if they've produced, if someone who's, we have a lot of students whose first language is not English, so if they've used the AI to produce a word perfect text, that's fantastic. We're very pleased for them. But the latest version, which we've just released the last couple of weeks, we can tell that it helped them fix up their English, and we can tell exactly how it helped them fix up their English. Of course, we're all going to use those tools all the time now. We use them ourselves to even though we're first language writers and speakers, we make errors. So, but we can tell the extent, we can tell whether they used it in those productive ways, how they used it in those productive ways, or whether the whole thing was written by the AI. And that's the distinction we need to make.
So we also stress for our students that this is not a library. Although it's taken everything, it's not like a library. They still have to read. They still have to find sources. What the AI does is synthesize the library in the world. And you can tell, if you understand grammar and writing, you can tell when they're only giving you cursory synthesized of the work. So I can tell, you can tell, you can see that. So we have to try and give our students the tools to use it, but also insist that they have to continue to read, to write, to contribute to the corpus. If we don't read and write, we're not contributing. It's just legacy stuff that's stuck there. So our role is to keep our students writing, keep our students reading, but also enable them in these bound corpuses, our corpuses, the ones that we create for them, right? Where they can get synthesis, they can get feedback, but it's relevant to what we want them to get. But we have to, as educators, we used to write textbooks. Now we have to write prompts. Now we have to create
rubrics.
Rubrics and create
and build knowledge bases.
Knowledge bases.
Yeah.
So our role is different, must be different, and we have to do it in collaboration. No single teacher can do it on their own. You've heard me say this many times, those who know me. We have to break out the classroom, collaborate as educators, create these new ecosystems that enable us to harness these tools in a productive way, not in where we shut down our minds and just produce these cursory synthesis of information for others.
Thank you, professors. Now I think we have some questions from the chat, from YouTube, right, girls?
Yes, we do. That was such an inspiring talk, right? That's very important, very relevant, that we have to discuss, right? We don't say that we have to discuss the future of AI because it's now, right? It's happening, and you have to discuss that in thinking our context. And that's, I will bring some of our questions and from the audience already, yes? It's possible to think about AI-mediated teaching in every context. What would they look like? And Ticiane's questions, how to address AI in a low technology environment? Yeah, that's what I meant with my first question.
Yes. Well, you know, the strange thing at the moment that low technology everywhere, you know, in Sierra Leone, the poorest country in the world, 90% of the people have iPhones.
No, not iPhones, cell phones.
Cell phones.
They don't have iPhones.
Not iPhones,
Yeah,
but cell phones.
Yeah.
And so there's still, you know, like everywhere, the cost of the technology is coming down, and you don't have to use high-end technology. It is possible to engage with whatever is available to provide access and voice, right? That's what the technology does. It allows agency and voice and hybridity, you know, that you're not just doing the canonical things and learning the traditional things, but you're able to move in and out any kind of device. And even if it's something at a library or a learning center, you know, there are other ways of establishing, like in India, I remember at the beginning they would put up stations, you know, where students could go in order to access their technology. We have to find ways of not limiting learners' ability to harness what is becoming ubiquitous and powerful.
But also, look, there's a cost to it, but it's a lot less costly than building a library. You know, for example, you know, it's a lot less. So compared to other technologies in the past, it's more accessible via cell phones, essentially. That's one thing. But the other thing is, you know, that people are looking towards building open source large language models, which are inexpensive, you know. So now, you know, we pay about the same for our OpenAI access as we do for cable TV. But, you know, that's actually, it's not hugely expensive, to be quite frank, but there's no reason why it shouldn't become a lot less expensive. And probably in the case of any school system, if the school system can afford to provide a classroom and a teacher, they can afford to do this as well. It's not that expensive, and it'll just become an integral part of schooling of any kind.
Yes, and Philippe, yes, we all have to become prompt engineers. The prompt is everything. You know, we have to be better at knowing how, from this synthesizing corpus, what kind of questions are going to give us the kind of answers that we want, and how do we keep modifying them? Yes, so.
But one of the things we've done with our environment is we've done several kinds of modification of the environment which scaffold that whole process. So you can put your prompts in there in an educationally accessible way. And, you know, so one of the questions is, the main sites like ChatGPT are not well structured for education. So we're trying to build an overlay which makes them.
Right. Now we have to depart because we're in a strange place, but soon.
No,
yeah.
Go,
go ahead.
Yep, next question.
Okay, there are a lot of comments here, and Lucas Rigonato, for example, are talking about people who thought that technologies would be bad things, and he said Socrates thought writing would make people dumb. So that's here now.
Yeah.
And I have a question from Elena Mendonça. She is asking, even with careful data selection, how can we deal with the reliability of AI? This question is related to the uses that teenagers have made of AI, for example, for emotional support.
Well, that's a hard question, and outside of what we're saying we as educators do not put our students in those AI spaces, right? We create a bounded corpus, right, that is pertinent to what we want to do. Now, we have to politically advocate for guardrails in that context, you know, the problem with teenagers and and what they do in the world in their private spaces. But one thing that I can say that I understand as an educator is that the gap between what we do in schools and what those teenagers or children do at home is getting bigger and bigger. And the bigger it gets, the worse it's going to become. And part of our role is to help them be discerning users of what they do in their private space and control what they do in the formal educational space in a more effective way.
And there was a comment there about cell phones being banned in schools. Cell phones are not the best place for doing schoolwork. So, in the same way, if they've built a classroom for you, they can give you a cheap laptop as well. There's no reason why mass-produced cheap laptops can't be very cheap, to be quite frank. So that might just an essential part of doing schoolwork. I mean, yeah.
I'm afraid that's all the time we had, right? So we want to thank you very much again, Professors Mary and Bill. It's been a pleasure. We had many more questions and comments, but unfortunately the time is short. Yeah. So, yes, so thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for being interested, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, it's such a deep topic to be talked about in such a short time, right? So
thank you. Well, goodbye all, and thank you very much.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye there.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Okay. Can we close the event? Guys, don't go home. No, don't go home. We are at home. It's over. Are you staying with me, Michele, Simone, Luciana, maybe João Paulo? It will be an honor to have you guys to finish. Guys, it's over. And of course, we have many thanks to say, and it's important to register here. We have been preparing ourselves, all of us, João Paulo, Michele, Simone, Luciana, and many others, for about a year. So it's over, yes, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this seminar. I'd like to say thank you to my dearest colleague and friend, Luciana Carvalho Fonseca, for all the support and for being with me in GEELLE. She's a good partner, good friend, and I'd like to say thank you to Luciana. Thank you, Lu. Obrigado, Lu. I'd like to say thank you to all the participants, you guys, you in the chat. I know that sometimes technology prevents us to, we would like to jump in here and talk, right? But with all the limitations, we are very thankful for your participation. I would like to say thank you for the future participants, because with technology, we kind of break the idea of time with time travel. So I'd like to say thank you to all the participants from all over the country and people from abroad. And thank you very much for being with us. Also, we would like to say thank you to the speakers, Brazilian speakers, the international speakers, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation for this seminar in a very different way, except for this final talk. We also, we had this idea of talking, which we had in the second part. And I'd like to say, finally, I would like to say thank you to the organizing committee. I will say all of their names. Luciana Carvalho Fonseca, Gabriela Gaspar, Ticiane Moreno, Samara Braga Jorge, Gabriel Grotto, Lucas Rigonato, João Paulo Araújo, Luciana Parnaíba de Castro, Tamara Farias, who edited with the help of all the GEELLE members, both videos we saw in the opening talks, and Michele Avila. Thank you, all of you. What are we taking today? What am I taking from this seminar? When I teach in the undergrad level, I ask my students, what are you taking home today? Are you able to think about it? Any discourse theory, any example, anything that changed your views of life, of society? That's a good question. I ask them every class. What are you taking home today? What should we do differently, right? And so, what am I taking home? Probably all of us from the GEELLE. It's quite challenging to organize a totally online event, especially after the pandemic, as the feeling, especially for events, academic events, is to see and to hug each other. That's very unfortunate. This is not possible, at least physically. However, we also think that when we were designing this seminar, we could offer an event in which people from all over the country and perhaps from other parts from abroad could participate, could join us. An event in which people could see the lives later on as they are all recorded at their own pace. Because we also know that people work and it's not possible to be here all day long. It's just our job to be here all day long. People watch it in the afternoon, or maybe people work in the morning. So digitality also collaborates with that. We can see anytime in our own pace, whenever I feel like. So it deconstructs a little bit the idea of an academic event that you have to be there all the time. We send you virtual hugs. It was not possible to hug each other, but we do send you virtual hugs. What else am I taking home? A lot of knowledge constructed through a lot of dialogue and a lot of visual literacies practices and expanded views of language education and teacher education. On top of this, we were able to connect and reconnect with colleagues, researchers, and friends from all over the country. And so finally, I would like to welcome you at GEELLE. If you want to join us in our discussions, we meet every month, just once a month, every Friday. So one Friday a month, and we discuss all the topics that we've seen in these 2 days. There is the site. I don't know if you can upload the site here in our email. Michele, can you do that, please?
Yes.
Yeah, you all do have the site. I'm going to help with our email. This is geelleusp@gmail.com. So if you're interested in joining us, send us an email. We would like to welcome all of you. If you're interested, we will welcome you. And I will finish with good old Paulo Freire. There is no way of not finishing this event. And so this is a quote from The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I'd like to finish with this quote. And by doing that, I will say thank you. The more radical the person is, and I would say the more progressive, the more open, the more flexible, the more diverse. Sorry, Freire, I'm complimenting you. I'm daring to compliment your quote. So the more radical the person is, the more fully he or she or they enter reality, so that knowing it better, he or she can transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, to see the world unveiled. This person is not afraid to meet the people or to enter a dialogue with them. I will repeat. This person is not afraid to meet the people or to enter a dialogue with them. This person does not consider himself or herself the proprietor of history or the proprietor of all people. or the liberator of the oppressed, but he or she does commit himself or herself within history to fight at their side. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. E acho que nos vemos no próximo evento, né? Sabe que se dá certo, a gente se vê no próximo evento. Thank you, guys. Obrigado.